They work great. There you go. Okay, just waiting for our distinguished guest. We're many minutes early, so. So they may be eavesdropping on some of the research diver. So, research diver, if you're listening, we're hanging out.
Oh, yes. Hang on. We're going to get to that. Our guest right here. We're talking about the Sylvia Earl. Every time she comes out here, she brings back the M&Ms.
Oh, thank you, buddy.
Sweetheart. Yeah, that's real great. Oh, these
are the new video that went up this morning is Primo.
What?
The transfer video, have you watched it? Isn't that great? You in particular were the star of the show.
They're stuck in here with me.
Yeah, let me know whenever they join you, and I'll secure some of the noise in here.
Okay, so I got the chat on. Okay. I'm just going to re-invite them to make sure that they're...
3 minutes.
Nice shirt you guys got there.
Yeah, there it
is. Cousteau thing on there.
Nice. Oh, I like your shirt too. I like one of those.
I think someone snagged mine. They didn't send it back after they laundered it.
Oh, really? What size one?
Large.
I'll look at it when it lands.
How many times have you been down?
This is my 8th mission.
Your 8th?
I was in here with Mark for...
Yeah, 2 years ago.
This is the second. Well, this is really missions.
So Stephen did 16 days in '88 when I was in St. Croix.
Nice.
A long time ago, Mark. I was just telling you years, decades.
Oh, we got Olando.
Olando.
Does it look the same? A little different.
A little different, but same lovely dining room. Galley.
Looks like Olando's trying to connect. Olando, can you hear us?
That was here for the St. Croix days. Pretty cool.
Right.
Olando, are you able to hear us from the Aquarius? Okay, so Olando doesn't have his camera on. He doesn't have his microphone on yet. Hey!
Hey!
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Olando.
Hi!
I'm pretty good. Okay.
Good to see you. I knew you
Nice to see you. Are you outside?
Good to be here. Yes, yes, on my veranda.
So, thank you for joining us, Olando. We're still waiting for Robin, Martin, and David.
Okay.
It's 2:28, so we still got a couple of minutes to go.
Yeah. Yep.
Is it a nice day there?
Yeah, it's a wonderful day.
Are you in Glenville?
Yes, Grenadines. Yes.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yes.
There we are. Sorry, we just...
So we're actually broadcasting this live. So it's going out on YouTube and Google Air.
Yep.
So we're known around the world, Olando.
So if anybody's tuning in early, this is Mark Patterson and Stephen Price talking to you from 20,000 millimeters under the sea at the world's only underwater laboratory, Aquarius, located in the heart of essentially a big marine protected area, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Aquarius is operated by Florida International University, and we're here from Northeastern University. And today's discussion, once we have all our honored guests, is going to be about marine protected areas and the future of the health of the Caribbean, on which so many lives depend. And already in the chat room here is Olando Harvey, who's Fisheries Biologist, or MPA Biologist at Grenada Fisheries. Thank you for joining us, Olando.
Thank you for having me.
And Stephen Price, who's across from me, is an environmental consultant with many decades of work in the Caribbean Basin, including many of the islands that will be represented here today.
And good friend of Olando's. Known him since he was a young man.
So you just started your position in Grenada at the Fisheries a month ago, is that right?
Yes, yes. Prior to that, I was I've been working with the Grenada system of MPAs for just about a year and a half. But I just started its new position as the National MPA Biologist just about a month ago.
That's great. And I see David Gill has just joined us. Hi, David.
Hello,
Hi,
David.
Mark.
Good
So,
to see you again. Thanks.
So David is from Barbados, and he's a postdoctoral fellow at SESYNC. And can you say what SESYNC stands for? Because I always mangle it.
It's the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center.
That's great.
Yes.
Well, thank you for joining us. We're still waiting for Robin and Martin, but we've already gone live. I told Olando that this is going out on a YouTube channel as well as Google Air. So while we're waiting for our other guests to join us, I thought I'd open the discussion with just a question about marine protected areas and both of your professional experiences. What have been the challenges that you've seen in the field or politically in implementing MPAs? And in short, give us a nutshell experience of what you have seen there. And I've also got the chat window open, so if we get questions, I can answer them that come in from people watching.
Sure, so, I guess I'll go first.
How about we'll start with Olando? Go ahead, Olando.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I've been working in marine protected areas for just over 7 years. I started out working with the Tobago Keys Marine Park on Union Island, part of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Then I moved on to Carriacou, was there at the Sandy Island Oysterbed MPA for just about a year. And now I'm in Grenada working at the national system level. So, but from my experience with marine protected areas in the Grenadines and Grenada in particular, I think there is a huge impetus to create a lot of them and have them work in a formal network system. But we've implemented them. We have management plans. We have a fair bit of funding enough to do most of the primary management activities. But what we lack a lot of is resource persons to do a lot of the biophysical, especially monitoring, biophysical and socioeconomic monitoring that would help to drive the management actions. So what we have is a lot of MPAs. Most of them were created not based on science per se, but more on maybe political will to have areas protected. So we, in order to have those areas work in the way they intended to provide ecological important species with areas where they can replenish areas that are fish, for example. We're not entirely sure that we have that representation as it is right now because they were not created using science per se. So that's one of the shortfalls that we have in our system. But we do have a few MPAs, and they're managed fairly successfully, I think. But the actual implementation of those MPAs for ecological reasons is a little questionable at the moment.
So you mentioned socioeconomics, and I know Stephen and David will have some insights as to how socioeconomics. Oh, we have a diver passing by. That's actually the director of the Aquarius program, Dr. Jim Forkian, who's escorted Stephen down for the day. He was just going by the viewport. Maybe I'll toss it to David because he's at the SESYNC, which often grapples with the complex economic issues facing MPAs. So Were you able to hear all of what Olando said there, David?
Yeah, and I do agree with Orlando that in many areas in the Caribbean, that capacity has been an issue in terms of being able to monitor activities going on within the protected area, monitor to see if the coral reef health has improved, and in terms of understanding how the MPA impacts on the local communities and socioeconomic monitoring. Well, the project that I'm looking on is not looking at economics per se, it's more looking at the management and the governance of marine protected areas. And so we know that there are thousands of protected areas around the world, but some of them work and some of them aren't working. And so the pursuit that is looking at what factors are present in those MPAs at work. And one of the main ones that we've seen a lot of is that those that do not include the local community, if they are not included in the decision-making process and where the MPA is placed and how it's managed and in the day-to-day, those MPAs seem to perform less, do not perform as well as those that include the local community, have them involved during the establishment, and also involved in the monitoring, involved in the enforcement. And so that's one of the key issues that we've seen in some areas where they've worked and not seen in areas where they're not working.
So that's an interesting point, local engagement. And I know Stephen's got some thoughts on that. I'll toss it to both of you here, and Olando can weigh in. But how about Stephen? How do you get
local engagement? Well, I've worked with 2 NGOs, and we do try and have public meetings and invite people, say, on London Island like Union, to come to sort of a workshop and voice their concerns and also take their suggestions very seriously. I think we can do a lot more, perhaps with the schooling program, but at the same time, I'm very familiar with, I have to go back to Union Island, where the teachers are getting quite involved, and I think we're going to see changes. They've also involved what we call water taxis, and people that are on the ground and watching it on a daily basis. Orlando, you're from Union Island. You can probably add more to that than I, even though we've been there several times. And your parents, for sure, are involved or have been.
Well, the marine protected areas throughout the Grenada Bank, both on the St. Vincent and the Grenada end, has stakeholder involvement as one of the critical components of both the MPAs. On the Grenada end in particular, they've made it a policy direction that they're going to move. So all the marine protected areas within their system are co-managed with the resource users. So it's not a top-down type of management system where you have government institutions or government ministries being the only ones involved in management. So you have stakeholder boards with representative stakeholders that use that resource, and they're the ones who make the management decisions for the day-to-day running of the MPA. Of course, because it's a natural resource, the government has their role to play in that. They provide the general policy directions, the overall policy directions, but the day-to-day running of all those MPAs are left up to the stakeholder management boards. So they have public meetings, public consultations on if they're going to make a decision, and maybe, for example, a change in user fees. So stakeholders are critically important, both on St. Vincent and the Grenada end. On the Tobago Keys Marine Park on Union Island is another one of those. It's a no-take reserve, so they have a lot of communications that are critically important, especially with the fishing community who stand to have the hugest impact on that particular resource. So they have a lot of dialogue with them and the water taxis and the day-to operators. So stakeholder involvement is critically important if you want to have a successful marine protected area, especially when you have limited resources that you would use for enforcement. So you need to have compliance rather than have a strong enforcement arm.
So you mentioned resources, and implementation is so key. one of the users of Aquarius, Mark Hay, has been working both in the Caribbean Basin but also in the Indo-Pacific, and he's recently discovered that MPAs can actually be almost postage stamp in size. And he's done this in Fiji by convincing local villages to declare a few hundred square yards of reef completely off limits to make it a no-take zone, like you mentioned was, I think, ongoing at a place in Union Island. Have you, either of you, had discussions or first-hand experience with some of the dynamics that influences how big the MPA is? Is it largely driven by, you know, the fishers and the community of people who use it, or is it a political decision that's driven by maybe tourism things? I think I'll ask David to comment on that, and then Olando, you can come back to that.
Sure.
Yes, a lot of the marine protected areas in that's been in the Caribbean, quite a few of them have been formed for political and for tourism purposes, and so as Olando has said earlier, there wasn't much science behind the establishment of quite a few MPAs in the region, and so the sizes and the shapes of the MPA have been a little bit arbitrary up till now, but we're seeing a lot more science going into the establishment of marine protected areas, and more importantly, protected area networks, which seem to be much more effective in protecting essential habitat and allowing for larval distribution and spillover to areas outside of the protected areas as well.
Okay. Olando, did you have any comment on the size question?
Yeah, I agree completely with David in that regard. A fair bit of our MPAs in the planning stages of the ICTAP, before we actually have maybe the gazetting of those MPAs and stuff, you would have stakeholder consultations where they have maybe a general area that they're thinking of or they're planning of putting an MPA. And then they would sit down with those different resource users, for example, the fishers, and say, we're planning to maybe enclose this area into an MPA, including no-take sections. And they would have discussions with the fishers to decide exactly how the boundaries would be drawn, so to ensure that the impact on the fishing community in particular is not overwhelmingly negative. So that's some of the considerations that they need to take into to keep in mind when they're actually drawing the boundaries. So you would bring all the resource users, and then you would sit down and have a discussion, and the possible boundaries would be drawn then. So in some cases, the MPAs do not take entire ecosystems into consideration. In some cases they just have a huge blanket area that they will put within the MPA and then zone it to ensure that certain critical habitats are protected within no-take areas.
Right.
So Stephen, you I know have had lots of experiences trying to draw together different habitats, so that the reef just doesn't start and end, below the waterline.
I guess that's been my more recent concern, Orlando, is the shoreline, protection of the shoreline, not only for keeping it there with these more frequent storms, but also for the suitable nesting habitat for the turtles, which are protected, and certainly both Grenadines and Vincent, for example, agree to protect these endangered animals. And then right up into the mangroves, and I guess even the birds that fly through these islands of the chain on their way to from North to South America. So I'm also concerned in there, and they're so tightly connected to the near shore, either the reef for the fish or for the seagrass beds. So I'm hoping that the marine parks will shift a little more emphasis to the actual shoreline. I guess in view of the developments that I see come in, there's little concern for the fauna in the beach or how it is or whether they're expanding it, and obviously the runoff from artificial grass for tourism or effluent from the resorts themselves. So maybe you can make a comment on whether that's going to be addressed in the future. I mean,
yeah. How do you get buy-in to protect more than, say, just the reef? How do you tie in the mangrove and even the sand in front of a hotel development, as Stephen pointed out, has infauna. So, David, how do you make it I guess it's a whole ecosystem MPA instead of just okay, this patch of reef is a no-take area?
Yeah, and yes, and I agree with what Stephen said. Protecting the marine resources we need an ecosystem-based approach. We have to look and see what caused the degradation in the first place. We have unsustainable fishing, and we also have a lot of issues with water quality due to land-based activities. And so, for marine protected areas to be effective, they have to address the threats to the marine environment. And so I guess the way we can do it is through education and raising awareness that the reefs are not this isolated ecosystem. It's intricately linked to others, to land-based activities, to other ecosystems, as well as to the people themselves. And that's what a lot of the work at SESYNC here is, to show the connection between us as humans and our environment. And so, as others say, we don't manage the reef, we manage people. And so we need to have the stakeholders completely involved and aware.
Yeah, I like that. Stephen brought some pictures into the habitat. One question I've got for Olando, and then David can comment. Stephen has his own perspective too, but he's going to be interviewed by a teen blogger that's here with the Northeastern group. Who's going to ask him about his multi-decade perspective. And this is the phenomenon of shifting baselines. So there's a couple of pictures here that he's brought, and here's a rather raggedy-looking set of corals. And here's another view of the reef in the Caribbean Basin that's dominated by macroalgae. And sadly, the Florida Keys have similar problems to the wider Caribbean Basin in that the percent cover of coral is not what it was several decades ago. When you take young people out on a dive for the first time in a coral setting, they often are ecstatic and say, that was the best dive ever, it was so cool, all those beautiful fish, and they have no idea what it used to look like. So when you're going about trying to implement an MPA or maintain one, how much education do you try and do about how it should have looked, or how it should look if we're successful, as opposed to just preserving the status quo, which in this case is, pretty crummy? Maybe I'll toss that to Olando.
Yeah, that's a critically important point. I think that we have not given much consideration to. Is one of the things that we try to do is, we're in the process right now in Grenada of establishing a new MPA in Grenadines off the Grenadines beach. And we're busy right now trying to get baseline data on. But as you said, we have a shift in baseline. So if we start now, when we start the consultation pretty soon, those are the photos that most of the people in the room are going to see. So that would be the starting point. So we have no historical data of what exactly it looked like before. So it's something that I think we show them photos of reef, but I think it's because most of the reefs around here are so degraded right now. I think I've seen reefs in the Pacific shown to give people an idea of what reef should look like, but I think it's a proxy, is the best we have to kind of give people an idea of what a reef should look like. But I mean, it's unrealistic. That's not how our reef in the Caribbean actually look like, even at its peak. Is the reefs there? We don't have the huge acropores and those different things in those photos. But it's something that I think we need to pay a little more attention to. Is trying to get our reefs back to maybe a 1980s type of level before they die off of the diademia and the degradation. But I guess we have to use what we have at the moment. So it's just we have to use those baseline photos that we have when we're starting the MPA, so that people can see what we have and try to get it not to degrade past that point, but to improve as we move forward.
Olando, have you been considering reef restoration using various techniques from replanting young pieces of coral to perhaps Tom Garreau's bio-rock with the electric system. Have you been planning those in the parks and monitoring them? Or?
We're about to start that project. Within maybe the next 3 or 4 months, we're going to begin doing coral nurseries, and we're going to start to input some reef balls. We have some funding to do pilot projects on both, so we're going to put some reef balls in and also start doing some coral nursery. We've been having we're going to have assistance from the Nature Conservancy, who's doing a large project in St. Croix. So we're going to start that within maybe the next couple of months. So that's one of the options that we're looking at.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask David about sustainability practices in general. One of the themes of Mission 31 that Fabien Cousteau is promoting is sustainable use of coastal areas. We're hoping that we can get the aquanauts, by the way, to come over to the window just before we close at 3. Are you able to, are they in the middle of their workflow right now? I don't want to interrupt their filming. Yeah, if you can get them over in 5 to 8 minutes, that'd be great. But anyway, Fabien's very passionate about sustainability. And on Thursday of this week, I think I told you that, maybe I didn't, but we're having a major outreach event with the Boston Museum of Science. And the theme is sustainability research. And that's something that is a front burner item at Northeastern University. Sustainability means different things to different people, though. So in the context of use of an area adjacent to an MPA, a coastal area. We have some aquanauts showing up as we speak right now. So let me make them bigger just so the studio audience can see. So that is Liz McGee, who is our 3Cs coordinator, and she's being joined by Fabien Cousteau on the right there. And they're both out on an excursion right now doing science for the mission. We've got projects on coral health, zooplankton health. As Jeremy Jackson from Scripps eloquently says, nobody cries for the zooplankton when the environment goes downhill, and yet all those tiny critters floating in the water are so vital to the health of corals. And they're about to be joined by, I think, Grace Young.
She's coming right up the side here.
Grace Young, who just recently graduated from MIT with a degree in ocean engineering. So there's the next generation next to the torch holder from the Cousteau legacy. But anyway, getting back to sustainability. Thanks for stopping by, guys. You never know who's going to show up in the viewport at Aquarius. Getting back to sustainability, David. Sustainability, is defined as use of today's resources so as not to compromise future generations. And in the Caribbean Basin, what sort of sustainable practices have you seen that work, and what is most sorely needed to be implemented to make the adjacent MPA work?
Yeah, sustainability is essential, especially for an area like the Caribbean with so many people depending heavily on natural resources, especially coral reefs. Some estimate there are about 5 million people in the Caribbean region dependent on fishing, and the Caribbean is the most tourism-dependent region in the world. And so, in looking at sustainability and moving forward, we have to realize that there needs to be a balance between the environment and the people who use it and depend on the resources. And we can find that balance. And we know that healthy environments provide more economic benefits and other benefits to the community than an unhealthy environment. And so addressing sustainability, we'll have to look at how we use the reefs, at what rate we are extracting resources and particular important species, particularly the parrotfish, which in recent time has gotten a lot of attention, has been one of the as one of the key species that help to ensure the coral algal balance on the reefs. And so We need to protect species and grazers such as the parrotfish. We need to control the what is impacting water quality in terms of land-based sources of pollution, and we need to be ready for climate change and when these things come. And the only way we can do this is by managing the local impacts. And managing the local impacts, again, being inclusive and involving the community, because if they're involved, it works. And a good example was in Roatan, West End Roatan. The Roatan Marine Park there it's formed by the local dive operators. They all got together and with the help of other partners, they formed the park. And the fish life there is amazing, and we can see the differences there in terms of an area that's protected where people are involved and people are helping out, and there's buy-in, rather than other areas where we don't have that in place.
So we're about 5 minutes out from ending our hangout here, and I wanted to ask one last question of you two as well as Stephen. If you had one front burner thing that you could wave a magic wand to with respect to MPAs and health of corals in the Caribbean Basin, what might that be? I'll start with David, and then we'll go to Olando, and then Stephen gets the last word.
Yes, okay. The magic wand. To have marine protected areas in the Caribbean that are effective at what they're doing, they're efficient given the scarce resources and limited capacity, and those that are equitable, where the community is not hindered by the conservation activities, but they are also reap the benefits as well from the protected area.
Great. So how about you, Olando?
Well, for me, I'd like to go to the reef directly. So I'd like to see a significant reduction in macroalgae overgrowth. So that would include maybe increased populations and biomass of maybe parrotfish. We've been seeing reemergence of the diadema. I hope that trend continues, and dealing with some point and non-point sources of pollution, land-based pollution. Those are the three areas that are critically important, I think, for most of our fringing reefs, which are particularly important for both our fisheries, tourism, and food security. So I think dealing with the algal overgrowth, because we're seeing recruitment, but the algae is just killing everything. So I think that is one of the areas that is critically important for us within the Grenada Marine Protected Area System.
Just to interject on that point, it has been found by the research that was linked to Aquarius by Mark Hay at Georgia that there may be a role for actually physically removing the algae right before a major recruitment event by hand, by humans going out and doing that, and then changing the smell of the reef to the point that the animals that need to settle will perceive the reef as being healthier than it is by getting rid of the algal smell. So I want to thank you both before I let Stephen have the last word, and taking time out of your Saturday to be with us here on the bottom of the sea. It's great work that you're doing, and we'll stay in touch, and hope you're able to tune in to the Mission 31 website and see all the great other stories that are coming out of this unique facility that FIU runs. And so Stephen, by the way, lived here for 16 days in 1988 with me when he was my graduate student.
A long time ago.
And he worked on coral health.
Coral health.
He did his PhD on coral feeding.
Feeding, yeah, that's right.
So you get the last word, Steve.
Well, I miss a bunch of species that I used to see so commonly, of course. But my concern is, one is the education, and for points that haven't been touched on too much, is the control of the effluent and runoff from the yachts that are becoming so numerous in the Caribbean now. The super yachts with the pollution, their demands for power and garbage disposal, but all of that seems to end up in the reef.
So it's all about water quality.
It's all about water quality,
Yeah.
and I think education of the tourists. I'm sure most of them wouldn't want to see any more degradation of the reefs, and somehow get more funding to help the restoration
we need
and
more
preservation.
money.
We need more money. It comes down to that, and realize, more money coming in to protect the reefs, and they are gems.
I'm going to turn the camera so you can see down the length of the habitat here. So that's the way out, and here's where the aquanauts sleep. That's the bunk room, and here's a beautiful view out onto the reef we've got next to us.
Thank you so much.
So thank you both so much
Orlando,
for joining us. And nice to see you, Orlando.
Nice to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
David, thank you so much for participating today.
David, we'll be in touch.
We'll be in touch. Take care. Keep up the good work.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.